used to clean the streets every morning. Yeah. Start in the morning, 6 a.m. in the morning, and close around in the afternoon, 2 p.m. Yeah.
How are you finding today in these hot temperatures?
I've been experiencing some sweat, in my body. It's like I'm doing a training, but I'm still working, Yeah, I think that the weather is changing. It's getting hotter.
Does the hot temperature make your job a little more difficult?
Yeah, it makes my job little more difficult because the cold weather, you've been wearing a lot of cold, heavy, clothes, so it can cover your body. But the weather, if you can't even wear, something that can cover your body, because always you'll be sweating.
Well, you're doing a great job, so I'll let you get on with it, and all the best. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Walking round central London, lots of tourists are out enjoying the heat, but they're mindful of taking regular breaks. So I'm on Trafalgar Square just now. We're well into the 30 degrees temperatures. There's not a cloud in the sky, but I must say the mist from the fountains is so refreshing. There's people here who've got their feet in the fountains. They're keeping cool. I'm going to go join them. What was your name, sorry?
My name's Damani. My feet are here in the pool because it's nice and warm. It's just cooling down. Or fountain, sorry.
Yeah, is that keeping you cool?
Oh, yes, it is.
It looks very refreshing, feeling the splash from the fountain.
Oh, yeah, I can feel the mist. It's nice. I come from America, so it's a little hot for me.
Jocelyn.
Jocelyn, and where are you from?
South Dakota.
How are you finding today?
It's hot, but it's not bad. It's nice here.
Yeah, if it only did this every once in a blue moon, that'd be swell. Like, we have a whole summer of this.
Well, that was nice and refreshing, and a change to the wet weather that tourists usually get when they visit the UK. But around the corner, Kevin is out working as usual. He's found a nice, shady place to stand during this heatwave.
Thank you very much. My name's Kevin. I'm a big issue seller.
You're here in central London. You stand here, most days, don't you?
Yeah, about 10 hours a day.
10 hours a day?
Yeah.
How are you finding it today in the heat?
Oh, as long as you keep yourself water over you and you drink water, you're okay. And I don't mind the heat, because I'm in a bit of the shade and it's like 20 in the shade, but you just got to go with the flow because we don't really get it hot in England as it is.
You're keeping high spirits, which is really good to see.
That's what you've got to be. I mean, at the end of the day, you just got to keep going. When other country can keep going, and that's what you've got to do, innit?
Mm-hmm. And how's your trade been today? Is it the same as usual?
No, it's very slow today, but you just got to, like anything, it go back to normal after the hot weather's gone, after a couple of days, and then like people think, because a lot of people have to travel on trains or tubes, and they're like cattle trucks.
For people like Kevin and Solomon, life goes on despite the heat warnings in place. They're happy out making a living, but after one exceptionally hot day, the temperature is set to rise even higher.
Fraser Knight reporting then. I'm looking at the pictures from Committee Room 14 in the House of Commons, where Sir Graham Brady will, in a few moments' time, announce the results of the third Conservative leadership ballot. Voting went on between 5 and 7 today. They've taken an hour to count the votes. Now, let's just remind ourselves that in the second ballot on Thursday, Rishi Sunak led the field on 101 votes. Penny Mordaunt had 83, Liz Truss 64, and Kemi Badenoch 49, and Tom Tugendhat 32. Now, everyone expects Tom Tugendhat to go out today, so I don't think there'll be any shocks on that score. But it's going to be very interesting to see whether Penny Mordaunt and Liz Truss can actually not just hold on to the votes that they had in the second ballot, but build on them. And in a way, that mainly depends on Kemi Badenoch and also the allocation of the votes from Suella Braverman, who was knocked out on Thursday. And I think she had, was it 25 or 27 votes? Now, a lot of those were expected to go to Liz Truss, but there's been a couple of MPs I've seen that did support her, and they have said they're coming out for Kemi Badenoch. Right, so Graham Brady is about to announce the result in Committee Room 14.
Total of 358. I'll again read the name of the candidate and the number of votes cast in alphabetical order. Badenoch, 58. Mordaunt, 82. Sunak, 115. Truss, 71, Tugendhat 31. So Tom Tugendhat is eliminated from the election. The other candidates are able to go forward to a fourth ballot, which will take place tomorrow between 1 and 3 p.m, with the result announced at 4 p.m. Thank you very much.
Well, that was short and sweet, wasn't it? That was Sir Graham Brady announcing the results. If you didn't quite catch them, let me give them to you again. Rishi Sunak has increased his vote by 14 to 115. Penny Mordaunt has gone down one from 83 to 82. Liz Truss has only put on, 7 votes to get to 71. Kemi Badenoch has put on 9 to get to 58. And Tom Tugendhat went down one from 32 to 31, and he, therefore, is eliminated. So where do his votes go? We will find out at 5 o'clock tomorrow. We are now going to convene our cross-question panel. With me in the studio tonight are Giles Kenningham, the former head of press for David Cameron while he was Prime Minister. Chris Skidmore, Conservative MP for Kingswood and former Minister who's backing Rishi Sunak. Baroness Natalie Bennett, Green Party peer and former party leader. And Nick Thomas-Symonds is here, Shadow International Trade Secretary and Labour MP for Torvine.
0345 6060 973. Tweet at LBC. Text 84850. Cross question with Iain Dale. This is LBC.
Well, before we go to a question, let's get our panel's reaction to that Conservative Party leadership election result. Chris Skidmore, now obviously rather good for Rishi Sunak, putting on more votes than any other candidate. Was that roughly where you thought he'd be?
Yeah, I think he's coming close now to the 120 figure he needs to get across the line to get to the final vote. And I sort of felt that actually when we looked at who's coming out, a lot of the candidates potentially we're going to see him as their second choice. And I think that'll be the case with Tom Tugendhat. He represents the One Nation wing of the Conservative Party. So I would expect a lot of those votes also to break for Rishi, and he'll be over the line tomorrow.
I would agree with you that I think some of Tom Tugendhat's votes will go there. But you look at the scores. I mean, Penny Mordaunt went down one, which I thought might possibly happen. I didn't think she was going to get many votes from Suella Braverman's camp. But Liz Truss only putting on 7 votes. Now, by common consent, your camp, Rishi Sunak's camp, want to fight Liz Truss in the final. Do you think that's looking increasingly unlikely now?
I honestly can't say. I think one of the fascinating things about this Conservative race is it's wide open on the right. I don't think the right of the party has made their mind up. And people sort of say, this is about the future direction of the Conservative Party, whether it's actually around sound money and fiscal conservatism versus taking tax cuts. Actually, on the right, they're both parties arguing for tax cuts, but also there's a social conservatism element which seems to be quite dominant. And it's who seems to be the keeper of the flame when it comes to keeping the culture war going, or looking at sort of trans rights, and that is not something I'm necessarily interested in. But obviously, for those who are, they haven't quite found who is their candidate that is going to represent their views the best.
Giles Kenningham, let's look at that position on the right, because we've got Liz Truss on 71, Penny Mordaunt on 82, Kemi Badenoch on 58. Now, it's not beyond the realms of possibility that tomorrow some Liz Truss supporters might get a bit cold feet and transfer to probably more likely Badenoch than Mordaunt.
Maybe. I mean, I think what happens at this point in the race, it's all about momentum. So you've seen Truss gain votes, Badenoch, Sunak, worrying for Mordaunt, had quite a bruising weekend. A lot of people coming out criticising her, and key are the people who've come out criticising her, which are former ministers who have worked with her. Interesting, though, there's no real anointed frontrunner here. It is, as Chris says, still quite an open race. I think the constituent is quite volatile. My money is still on probably, I think, a Sunak-Truss showdown in the end. Yes, Badenoch has made some ground, but I would have thought you need a lot more at this stage. People are talking her up as a sort of insurgent. I feel like that's slowing down.
0345 6060 973 if you'd like to put a question to our panel on the Tory leadership race, or indeed anything else. We were talking about the ambulance crisis earlier. Maybe you want to ask about that, or what's going on in Sri Lanka. Lots and lots of subjects we can cover over the course of the next hour. Nick Thomas-Symonds, there was a confidence vote today. Boris Johnson, I didn't hear the speech, but I was told it was quite robust. I don't know if you were in the chamber for that. What do you make of what's going on in the Tory party at the moment?
Well, watching that debate last night, it seems that many of the Conservative candidates for the leadership are endorsing or accepting the criticisms that Labour has been making of the government for some time. If we're to accept what the Conservative leadership candidates are saying, there's been a problem with growth in the economy for some time. That's what we've been saying. There's huge problems with underinvestment in public services. That's what we've been saying. Problems with Rishi Sunak, unable to tackle the issue of fraud. One of the candidates indeed put that point to him last night. So what I think we're seeing really is a party that's been in power for too long. They've been in power for 12 years, not so much renewal as Keir Starmer said in his speech in the Chamber today. It's like a team going for relegation in the Premier League that's burning through its managers. And it looks like this government is coming to an end and we need a complete change.
Natalie Bennett.
Well, I'd say we need an even larger change than that, because I think everyone knew it was coming, so there hasn't been and probably won't be much commentary on it. But if you look at Tom Tugendhat being locked out at this stage, you look at the what will now be the final public hustings. Opinion did a poll after that, and good PM versus bad PM, positive and negative scores, and Tugendhat with plus 17 was the only one getting a positive score from the general public. Mordaunt was -4, Sunak -5, Badenoch -17, Truss -26. Tory MPs are making the choice at this stage, and then we're looking towards Tory party members who are in no way representative of the country in any way whatsoever, who are deciding who the next Prime Minister is. We have a broken system. Boris Johnson got power with...
Do Green Party members represent the country as well?
Well, the last democratic election, which was actually, oddly enough, the last European election, which was conducted under a proportional fair system, we got 11% of the votes. We got more percentage of votes than the Tory party did.
What I meant
election.
was, when you conduct a leadership election in the Green Party, it is your members that choose the leader or the leader and co-leader, exactly the same as the Tory party.
And indeed, but of course, if we had a proportional electoral system, we had a stable system.
You're avoiding the point I'm making, which I think is completely valid. If you're criticising the Conservative Party for their membership not representing the country, the same can be said of your party.
I'm not criticising the Conservative Party. I'm criticising our political system, which simply doesn't deliver a democracy or decision-making.
You said the Conservative Party members are in no way representative of the country, and I'm just saying to you, nor are Green Party members.
And our system allows, again, the Conservative Party members to decide who is Prime Minister. If we had a proportional electoral system, if Boris Johnson hadn't got 100% of the power in the Commons with 44% of the vote, if we actually had a Parliament that reflect the views of the people, then we would not be in this situation.
OK, well, lots to get our teeth into there. Let's go to a question from Chris in Richmond. Hello, Chris.
Good evening, Ian. Good evening, panel. Given that the Tory party leadership contenders refused to take part in another debate on Sky this week, can they ever complain again about cancel culture?
I suppose they would say they have taken part in two, and they weren't very edifying. So they thought, well, why then sort of rub salt into the wound and do another one?
Well, the point is that they want to be up for scrutiny, and if they can't debate amongst themselves, then how's it going to work in a general election? They're going to refuse to stand up in front of, the leader of the Labour Party and the Lib Democrats and the SNP. It's pathetic. They want a job. They've got to go through some pain.
I mean, Thomas-Symonds, there is a dilemma here, isn't there? Because I'm not even sure why they did the first two hustings with Channel 4 and ITV. I wasn't sure why 5 of the leadership candidates agreed to do an interview with me last week, because our listeners are not the electorate here. It's 358 Conservative MPs that are the electorate. So they'd be far better spending their time phoning all of them, wouldn't they?
Well, they clearly should be subjecting themselves to public scrutiny. But the point about it being an edifying debate, that is within the control of the candidates themselves. It's the way the candidates behaved that made it unedifying. And watching that debate last night, what we heard was a series of criticisms of the government, a series of criticisms of the past 12 years. As I've indicated in my first answer, many of the criticisms are criticisms that the Labour opposition has made, and I suspect that is why the Conservative Party HQ allegedly didn't like the idea of the debate, because what they were actually doing in public was confirming the criticisms of the opposition.
Why did the campaigns agree to this debate? I don't know whether it was Conservative campaign headquarters that agreed or the individual campaigns. I suspect there was an element of both. Because, and you can understand why they've now Rishi Sunak and Liz Truss have said, no, we're not doing the last one. Apparently Rishi Sunak was overheard saying to Liz Truss at the end of the debate last night, why on earth did we agree to do this? And you can see why he said that.
Well, on the hustings point, on the issue of scrutiny, I've organised an environment hustings this morning, which all candidates agreed to come to, and we had a healthy debate on the environment.
We weren't allowed to watch the proceedings.
Well, obviously it's the MPs that are choosing in this process. They are the selectorate, and then we also had the 1922 hustings also today. So there is a process that should be followed. If candidates wish to do the TV debates, I think what's been useful from my perspective, actually, it demonstrated that everyone was going after Rishi Sunak, asking. He was the one who got asked all the questions because he is ultimately the person who had the greatest experience in government. I think is seen as a prime minister figure, but at the same time, Penny Mordaunt was put under the test in the first leadership contest. She rocketed up the ratings, and then after that first debate came down again because she didn't perform as well. So there is an element of scrutiny, but they have done 2 debates, which I think is more than what we probably had at the general election in 2019. I can't remember. There weren't that many sort of debates, were there?
No, because Boris Johnson refused to do them. Giles, when you were advising David Cameron, I mean, what were you saying to him? Well, we need to do as many debates as possible, or trying to prevent him from doing debates?
Well, I think in the general election in 2015, certainly the conventional wisdom that 2010 had been so damaging. So we agreed to do one, but it was one with, I think, 7 other parties. And after that, we didn't do any more. Our view was that it sucked the life out of the election campaign in 2010. It had been damaging. As a front runner, as you know, you've got everything to lose. So, I mean, to Chris's point, the candidates do face a lot of intense scrutiny. There will be hustings now for 6 weeks. I think there's going to be 2 a week. They're going to be in-depth interviews on broadcast. There'll be set speeches.
Will there be? Because Liz Truss hasn't done a single interview in this campaign.
But she will do. She will do.
Will she?
Yeah,
you reckon?
Yeah, you'll have to within the scope of the next 6 weeks.
So she admitted in that debate last night that she said, well, I'm not the slickest presenter of all the people on this panel, which in a way was a statement to the obvious, but it was quite something for her to say, because being able to convince the electorate is part of the job.
But do you think that is? Because I think people have had enough of those polished soundbite politicians, hence the rise of Trump, hence the rise of Boris. Boris didn't speak in perfect soundbites. People liked him because he was free-flowing. So I don't think it was such a risk to say that at all.
Natalie?
Well, I think if you don't have a series of debates, and, I was in that 2015 one with David Cameron, and the fact that it was one-off was very frustrating. I mean, we then had the contenders debate with everyone else, but not David Cameron. But if you have a series of debates, issues are explored and brought out. And I think, we've already seen that today.
Not with 7 people on a stage, though, are they?
Well, I think what we saw in that 2015 debate was the anti-austerity argument was put by 3 of us there, the 3 women on the panel, and we put that anti-austerity argument collectively, and that got the debate moving, not necessarily immediately, but longer term. But I think
David Cameron got majority.
Just picking up the Conservative Environmental Network, I believe the report suggests that all of the candidates there did sign up to net zero, finally.
The campaign has worked.
However...
Did Kemi?
Well, no,
she at the meeting she did, certainly.
And then
I don't know what's happened subsequently.
Well, subsequently there is a report saying, it might still be necessary for delay. Yeah. So there's been backpedaling immediately. So what you do is, if you have a series of events, what people say and what they mean become much clearer.
I think it was very clear in the hustings. She said she committed to the legislation on net zero. She wouldn't seek to reopen that legislation. That was the guarantee I was looking for, and I thought I got. So, and Alec Sharma, the COP president himself, was there chairing it.
Was he?
Yeah, and you can't sort of turn, do a U-turn in front of 50 or so MPs who were there. So I haven't heard about what she said subsequently.
Well, he would be relieved because he said that he would resign if the winner did renege on that.
Yeah, actually, what Liz said in the hustings, that her immediate priority was to make sure Alec didn't resign because we needed him there. So
very populist of her. Chris in Richmond, do you want to come back briefly?
Well, I think that Nick was right. I also think that if these candidates want to talk about a change in politics and a new way of doing things, they need to understand what people's frustrations are, and what better way than to listen to members of the general public rather than the echo chamber, which is the Conservative Party membership, which is dwindling from last time I checked.
Well, it's actually rising, but don't let the facts get in the way. It's just under 200,000. I think when it was fought in 2019, it was about 180,000. But admittedly, that's a small percentage of the population. I don't deny that. But that's the way that each party decides how it's going to elect its leader. It used to just be MPs that were selecting the leader. Some people wish to go back to that, but I don't think that's ever going to happen. Chris, thank you very much. 0345 6060 973 if you'd like to put a question to our panel. It's 16 minutes past 8.
LBC Cross Question with Iain Dale on LBC. Call 0345 6060 973.
18 minutes past 8. If you've just tuned in and you missed the moment that Sir Graham Brady announced the latest ballot results for the Conservative Party leadership, Rishi Sunak leads with 115. Penny Mordaunt has got 82. Liz Truss 71. Kemi Badenoch 58. And Tom Tugendhat 31. He's therefore eliminated. That was the subject of our first question, and it's the subject of our second question. But let me just remind you who's on our panel. Chris Skidmore is the Conservative MP for Kingswood, former Universities Minister. Natalie Bennett, Green Party peer, former party leader. Nick Thomas-Symonds is the Shadow International Trade Secretary, Labour MP for Torvine. And Giles Kenningham is former head of press for David Cameron. He's founder of Trafalgar Strategy. Alex is in Watford. Hi, Alex.
Good evening, Ian. Good evening, panel. How on earth can this system of electing a leader have any worth when they elect a leader like Boris Johnson? The only sense I've heard speak tonight is the lady from the Green Party, who has gone to the Lord, sadly.
Well, I don't think she would be elected leader of the Conservative Party. I mean, whatever you think of Boris Johnson, this system of voting in the Conservative Party came in 1997 2001 was the first time it was used. It was brought in under William Hague, and Ian Duncan Smith was the first leader elected under it, then David Cameron, and then Boris Johnson, because Theresa May, it didn't go to the membership. So, I mean, you can say, well, it produced Boris Johnson. It also produced David Cameron, who, I mean, whatever you think of his decision to hold a Brexit referendum, I think he was actually, I think a lot of people think he was quite a good leader of the Conservative Party. So, Natalie Bennett, is this system worth it if it can produce Boris Johnson?
Well, I think Boris Johnson is just the last in a long line, and I'm afraid I don't agree with you on the view of David Cameron. I think the biggest problem with David Cameron was that he wanted to be there because he thought he should be Prime Minister. He didn't actually know what he wanted to do when he got there. If you look at Theresa May, I have respect for Theresa May as an individual, but she'd never actually fought an election. And when Andrea Leadsom imploded, she didn't even have to fight an election for the leadership. She had a safe seat. So people just don't have the political experience, don't have the political knowledge. So, it is Cameron, then May, then Johnson. It's got worse, but it's a long-term problem.
How should we elect our party leaders if it's not done by the party membership? I mean, it's quite difficult to think of we don't have a presidential system in this country. David Cameron tried open primaries for candidate selections, which were a mixed success. So how do you think we should change the way we do it?
Well, I think the problem isn't the party leadership. The problem is the first-past-the-post electoral system that means Parliament doesn't reflect the view of the people. If you actually had a Parliament that reflect the views of the people and the Prime Minister...
That's a different question. I don't know why you keep going back to this, because it's totally irrelevant to the question of electing a party leader.
Well, the party leader is one thing, but what we're choosing, is called as a saying, is the Prime Minister. That's what's happening. That's what people are concerned about.
But for 300 years, this is the way we've chosen Prime Ministers.
And look at the state of Britain today.
Well, Winston Churchill became Prime Minister effectively under the same system when he took over from Chamberlain. It was an internal party thing. It wasn't put to a vote of the people or anything.
But let's have a look at what's happening, around the country, where there's increasing numbers of councils who look like PR in terms of they're a blend of parties and their rainbow coalitions.
Well, again, you're banging on about PR, which is totally irrelevant to the discussion.
It's not, because this is because we have first past the post, you're not just electing the party leader, you're electing the Prime Minister.
But I'm saying to you, who should elect the party leader? That's what I'm saying.
But if you had a different political system...
I mean, how can we have a discussion? If I ask you a question, you say, well, that's not really the question. The question is this.
Well, no, because if you what people are concerned about there is I don't think people care less who leads the Conservative Party, the general public. They care very much who becomes Prime Minister. And if you had a different kind of system, it might well be actually that if one party leader fell and you had a blended coalition government, you would either get a rearrangement of the coalition or you would
still then have a new party leader from that party, whether they become Prime Minister or not. All I'm asking you seem unable to answer this question, is who should elect the party leader?
Well, I agree that the members should... Let me answer this absolutely clearly. I agree the members should elect the party leader, but that shouldn't decide who the Prime Minister is. That's supposed to be, and the system is supposed to be that Parliament decides. But because we have an unrepresentative Parliament...
And the Conservative Party has 358 seats. You may not like that, but under the current system, that's what they've got.
With 44% of the vote. The majority of people did not vote Conservative last time. So then they didn't get the party they wanted, and they're not getting the leader
times the number that voted for the Green Party, isn't it?
Yes, but if we had a PR system, we beat the Tories in the last fair election, and if we had a PR system, we would have 10 or 11% of the seats easily.
Chris Skidmore, going back to Alex's question, how can this voting system produce a PM of worth when it produced Boris Johnson?
Well, it obviously produced, at the time, a leader who went on to achieve the greatest Conservative majority since Margaret Thatcher. And the public decided, at that election, that Boris Johnson, should be Prime Minister. So Boris Johnson is not just the public of the Conservative Party. That leadership was then confirmed in the 2019 general election, and Boris Johnson was the overwhelming winner. Now, just because of subsequent events, in terms of, Boris Johnson's own leadership does not mean that the system is at fault. It's the same, I guess, with the American system and Richard Nixon. Nixon was an overwhelming sort of leader, and then events brought him down. So I would say that actually, when it comes to this system, yes, politics is imperfect, and we've had a massive debate about the imperfections in that system. Natalie is an unelected peer. That's imperfect at the moment because she's actually a great politician for the Green Party, and it's not to her credit that she's unelected and doesn't have a mandate. So the fact is that we do need to think about the systems that we have. There's no point sort of trying to claim that any one system that you pick is always going to have an opponent and a proponent. Actually, me and Nick once were on the same side during the AV referendum. We both agreed with the one member, one vote principle. And actually, some of these things do cross party lines. But ultimately, it's the system we have. Let's just get on with it. Let's just find, ultimately, not just the leader of the Conservative Party, let's find a Prime Minister, because that's what is key here. We're in government, and we need someone who's going to stand up for all voters and not just Conservative Party voters.
Nick Thomas-Symonds, this system, which effectively it's the same system in the Conservative Party and the Labour Party, it produced Tony Blair, but it also produced Jeremy Corbyn, didn't it? So there is an obvious flaw, many people would say, in it. Or is it just the best system that we've got until somebody invents something else? And so far they haven't.
Well, it's slightly different in the Labour Party, of course, because it isn't just MPs, party members, it's also trade unionists. It is a slightly different system. But on the principle of involving party members, I think that's hugely important. I think our party members pay great service to our democracy and don't get the credit that they deserve. They're not the ones who get all the public-facing roles, but they do the hard work day in, day out, and are an essential part of our democracy. But the issue here is really, for me, is around Conservative MPs, because Conservative MPs originally put Boris Johnson in the last two in 2019. They knew what Boris Johnson was like. There's no point pretending it's a surprise. This is someone who entirely disregards rules and treats them with contempt. That was his record before. But secondly, Conservative MPs, and that's what tonight's vote is about, are also leaving Boris Johnson in power now, whilst this election goes on.
Just as Tony Blair was left in power when he announced that he was standing down, you mean?
But Tony Blair's Downing Street had not had 126 fixed penalty notices immediately prior to what had gone on. I mean, the idea that I can't think of any Prime Minister who's left office in disgrace in the way this one has.
But our Constitution and our history suggests that this is not untypical, that a Prime Minister, when they announce that they're leaving, they stay in office until a new Prime Minister is selected or elected. This is not without precedent.
Boris Johnson is not a typical Prime Minister, and if we think about the last 6 months and the conduct that we've been subjected to by Downing Street, and we've only got to look at recent days. We've had this national emergency declared, quite rightly, in terms of the heat, both today and tomorrow. Boris Johnson isn't even chairing COBRA committee. He's leaving that to Kit Malthouse. And again...
It's not usual for other ministers to chair COBRA meetings.
Well, it certainly is the case that other ministers can chair COBRA, but this is, again, a pattern of behaviour from this Prime Minister. I mean, you think back to the start of the pandemic, in the early part of 2020, it was the same thing. The Prime Minister abdicating responsibility for leadership. He shouldn't be remaining in office now.
Giles?
Look, no system is perfect. I worked in a coalition government. That wasn't great. When Cameron got a majority in 2015, the sea change in how things were done, government ran a lot smoother. There were less leaks. There was clearer decision making. There was less horse trading going on, which was not good for the country. So yeah, no system's perfect, but this is as good as we've got. as far as I'm concerned. And to what Chris was saying on Boris Johnson, like last time there was a leadership campaign, he then got a stonking majority at the end of it. In relation to him staying in Downing Street, yes, it should be as quick as possible that he is removed, in the sense that he is a lame duck Prime Minister, but it is only going to be 6 weeks. If it was going on for 6 months, then I think we'd have a problem, but there is a clear pathway to us electing a new leader.
Natalie?
I just want to come back on what Chris said about the unelected House of Lords. The first thing I did after my maiden speech was march up to the Bill office with the elections for the House of Lords bill, a private member's bill. But nonetheless, the practical reality is our politics is so broken now that the Lords is more representative of the country than is the Commons.
No, not with 110 Lib Dem MPs as a joke.
Because the crossbenchers, the non-party people, have the balance of power.
Age profile? Well, you're about the youngest in there, aren't you?
No, not by a long way. But no, the views in terms of the balance of power being with the non-party people is closer.
I think Cameron's government made was not obviously following through on the Lords reform that was obviously part of the coalition. And if there's anything I could do now, it would be to bring in fixed-term peerages and stop giving out these life peerages, because at the moment, once people have got them, they're there forever.
And I think having a system whereby you have experts who may dip in and out, and you sort of separate the two off, but I completely agree.
But the problem is it is a shock absorber at the moment. I mean, Lord Baker of Dorking, former Conservative Education Secretary, got up today and was again, for the umpteenth time, absolutely scathing about the schools bill and said it should stop. And Lord Judge, the leader of the crossbenchers, former Lord Chief Justice, said he'd tabled an amendment, tabled a motion to stop the schools bill. So it's terrible. It's awful. It's a demonstration of just how broken our system is. The House of Lords at the moment is trying to defend human rights and liberties and trying to ensure the government functions.
We're going off the subject, but it's quite an interesting discussion. So let's continue it for a couple of minutes. It isn't the problem, Natalie, that the House of Lords, no matter what its flaws are, I mean, nobody would start from here, it actually works. It does the job that it's intended to do.
It does until it doesn't, until the point where those crossbenchers, having said this is really wrong, it shouldn't happen, this is really wrong, it shouldn't happen, get leaned on by the government and go, oh, well, we're the unelected House, so we're going to have to let something through even though we know it's absolutely wrong. And that's something that an elected House of Lords hopefully wouldn't do.
The elected House of Commons must always have primacy over the House of Lords, mustn't it?
Yes, but the way you could elect the House of Lords is 1 10-year term. You can't go back, you can't go into the Commons. This would be a place where you perhaps finish a career, where you go off and do something different afterwards, and where people would be more independent of the parties, elected on a different cycle. And that's the way that you could have both an elected Lords and elected Commons. And yes, the Commons would be predominant, but the Lords would be able to say, like, for example, with breaking human rights, international human rights law, with shipping refugees off to Rwanda, say this breaks international law, this is unacceptable, and hold the line.
Nick Thomas-Symonds, obviously Tony Blair had an abortive attempt to reform the House of Lords. It's an incredibly thorny thing. David Cameron always used to say, well, this is a second or third term issue, but when he did get a second term, he shied away from it and then left office. Can you ever see meaningful reform to the House of Lords?
I can, and of course Gordon Brown is chairing a commission at the moment.
Keir Starmer in an interview the other day, I think with Andrew Marr, basically said, not really top of my priority list.
Well, no, our priority list for the next Labour government will be right at the top, the cost of living crisis, which we'll want to do all we can to help as soon as possible.
Well, hopefully in 2 years' time it'll be over.
Having seen the pitch to the Tory leadership candidate, sadly I doubt it, but in terms of the House of Lords, clearly we have a situation where we've got 92 hereditary peers left. It is indefensible in a modern democracy to have people in our legislature who are there by virtue of where they were born. So it has to change.
Yep.
I mean, that is something that it would be quite easy to deal with, wouldn't it, Chris? To just get rid of the hereditary peers. Why hasn't that been done?
Oh, it's a good question. I think potentially the Tory
party...
Not
Conservatives, are they?
The Tory party was scarred probably from what happened back in whenever it was 2012, I think, when there was a vote and obviously largest Tory rebellion at the time. I mean, there's been far larger since. But we didn't have a majority to do anything. Now we've had a majority. Obviously, focusing on Brexit has been a priority around Nick's right. It's not always the most significant thing to be doing. But ultimately, hopefully one day there will be reform. I think time's come.
And today, Lord Grocott, Labour, put down the first reading of the bill to get rid of the hereditaries.
Well, let's see how far that gets. Thank you very much, all. We'll come to more of your questions in a moment. 0345 6060 973. We're going to move on from Tory leadership. You might be a bit relieved about that, or maybe not. It's 8:33. Andy Ivey has the LBC News headlines.
Tom Tugendhat is out of the contest to be the next Conservative Party leader after coming last in the latest ballot of Tory MPs. Rishi Sunak remains the front-runner. He came top with an increased number of votes, 115. Penny Mordaunt was second on 82, Liz Truss third with 71 votes, and Kemi Badenoch fourth on 58. The next round of voting is tomorrow. A 14-year-old boy is missing and believed to have drowned after getting into difficulty in the River Thames in southwest London. He's the fifth person to die in open water in recent days in the heatwave. The hottest place in the UK today was Stanton Downham in Suffolk, with a provisional reading of 38.1 Celsius. LBC weather, a very warm night, the chance of a shower in the far southwest. Tomorrow it'll be exceptionally hot for much of England, Wales and parts of Scotland, a high of 40 degrees.
LBC. Cross Question with Iain Dale on LBC. Text 84850.
Yeah.
8:36 on LBC. Giles Kenningham, Chris Skidmore, Natalie Bennett and Nick Thomas-Symonds with us taking your questions. 0345 6060 973. You can text your question to 84850. Kieran is in Durham. Hello, Kieran.
Hi there. The temperatures that we're experiencing this week are likely to become more common. I'd like to ask the panel, do they think that it's time to fundamentally rethink the way that we do our infrastructure in this country moving forward?
Chris Skidmore, let me come to you first on this, because we heard from you earlier about your trying to persuade all of the candidates to sign up to the Net 50 targets. And that's really allied to this question, I suppose, isn't it? Because we used to have the arguments about, well, we're not really ready for snow. And so all the councils would then stock up with grit and snow ploughs. And then, of course, we wouldn't have any snow for 10 years. Is this a bit the same? Or do you think that this is now almost a semi-permanent state of affairs where each summer we are going to experience the kind of heat waves we've got? And therefore, we're going to have to look at the way we do things, not just in infrastructure, but from way of life, maybe become a bit more Mediterranean.
Yeah, I think the science is overwhelming, and for anyone who says that net zero is an arbitrary target, it's completely wrong. Thousands and thousands upon scientists have now proven the link of actually increased carbon dioxide emissions with global warming, and the trajectory of global warming as it stands is far more rapid than what we even thought 5 or 10 years ago. And actually the modelling shows that whereas this was a 1 in 1,000 year event back in early 1990s, potentially by 2050 and beyond, this is a 1 in a 4 year event. And that desperately means we need to address our inadequacy when it comes to our infrastructure, whether that's transport, whether that's also our actual homes. And one of the things that has actually happened, which shouldn't have happened, is that we've just built 1.3 million homes over the past 10 years that will have to be retrofitted. And actually, when it comes to looking at the cost of delivering this, it's slightly different from your grit analogy, because obviously the grit's there to be used for roads, may not be used all the time, but some of the infrastructure changes that we can put in place now will be valuable day in, day out. So insulation will save people £400 a year every year if we actually put it into homes, and it will also keep houses cooler in the summer as well as warmer in the winter. So actually, getting on with this infrastructure change needs to happen anyway, so we might as well get on with it now and start saving people money. And this is a real way of addressing the cost of living crisis.
Is it also things like maybe putting solar panels on roofs of new build houses, which would cost 5,000 to 10,000, but in percentage terms, the whole cost, that wouldn't be an insurmountable barrier?
And there is a real question to be asked about there being a tipping point. So the more you do, obviously the cheaper the product becomes, the cheaper the actual technology becomes, and we get better technologies. So if you think about mobile phones, and we all, I don't know about your first mobile phone, Iain, can you remember what it looked like? Was it sort of a brick size?
It was a big brick.
Because everyone
1989.
But the challenge we got to remember is that we didn't have government schemes saying, have a free mobile phone, do X, Y, Z, because there was a utility to a mobile phone, and the market drove it. And we've got to be able to look at this aspect of utility and how we bring in private investment, not just government investment, for the future. So we can have that mobile phone analogy of everyone saying, well, actually, I need insulation, I need solar panels, I need a heat pump. In the same way they thought, actually, I need a mobile phone. Then you go from the brick mobile phone to an Apple phone and then an iPhone. And that's the reality of what innovation can do when we actually get sort of human industry behind a demand question, which I think there is a clear demand now for some of these products. And they will become cheaper and they will become better over time.
Natalie.
Well, I entirely agree with Chris in terms of insulation's needed, and in terms of the extra cost. I mean, I was citing last week Committee on Climate Change report from 2019 to get to a net zero home, which is also going to be a far more comfortable home, extra 1% to 4% build costs. But of course, the savings in energy bills come back on that very quickly, and I think it's an absolute tragedy. There will be people who moved into a new home last week. Now, that new home, had we kept a net zero standard, would be far more comfortable. But those people will now be sweltering in a home that's impossible to cool down because we haven't had those build standards. And building in those standards is good for people and planet. If anyone hasn't worked out where the accent comes from, I come from Australia originally. Traditional Australian architecture is a house raised on stilts with verandas all around, so the wind blows through and blows underneath and cools everything down. You look at the brick boxes we've got now. Now, you don't have to go for the Australian outback house, but there's so much that you can do to build houses that are far more comfortable for people, far more affordable, far more livable. And we're going to have to spend an absolute fortune retrofitting houses that were just finished this week because they're not nearly good enough.
Giles.
Yeah, I mean, it's quite shocking we're in a situation where the government's telling people to avoid mass casualties, don't go out, stay at home, close your windows, curtains, I think put ice on fans. Look, all the evidence does show that soaring temperatures are becoming more common, yet we've got a situation where the trains are barely running, you're getting flights cancelled, so clearly the infrastructure is way behind and needs to fast forward and keep up with what's happening.
Nick?
Well, firstly, you need the short-term grip. I mean, we've been arguing for a Minister for Resilience, and of course we need a Prime Minister on the job, taking charge of Cobra themselves, that's obvious. But secondly, what we really do need is investment to get to net zero. That's why we're promising to invest £28 billion each and every year in that transition to net zero. Home insulation is absolutely vital. There's 19 million homes out there that we should be insulating. We should be doing that now. That makes sense. both in terms of the climate crisis we face, but also in terms of the cost of living. But we also need to see that the jobs of the future are green jobs, whether it's the battery factories to be able to power that transition from diesel to electric, also investing in renewables, whether it's solar, Iain, which you mentioned a moment or two ago, tidal, onshore, offshore wind. This should absolutely be fundamental to what the government does. And looking at the debate between the Conservative leadership candidates last night, they didn't even, to me, to be agreed on the principle of net zero.
And this is
well, they were specifically asked that, and I think apart from Kemi Badenoch, they all said yes, they were. So I don't know what debate you were watching.
Well, I was watching a debate where not all 5 candidates committed to net zero. There was someone who's a candidate.
Will tell you that she has today.
The Conservative Environment Hustings, she said she would not roll back on the legislation to obviously has net zero by 2050, which we all saw and heard as a commitment to maintain net zero by 2050.
Well, I don't doubt what Chris is saying. I wasn't at the hustings, but I think if you look at some of the public statements, indeed some of the latest ones, they look far more ambiguous.
But if you look at what's actually happened today, news out in the last couple of hours, the High Court, in a case brought by the Good Law Project, has just said that the government's net zero strategy is inadequate and unlawful. It has the strategy, but it has the targets, but it's not actually delivering what's needed, and that's what the High Court said today.
How can that be unlawful? I mean, I accept you can criticise it politically, but how can it be unlawful?
Well, that's what the High Court found, and I'm not a lawyer, but my understanding of this is that because we have the net zero target in law, then the government has to demonstrate that it's taken steps to deliver that legal target. And so the High Court has found the government has not delivered those steps. So it's a procedural thing. The government is failing to act on the words that it's offered.
Do you understand that, Chris?
Yeah, I think basically we had the Climate Change Act, one of the few countries that actually has a legislative framework for delivering our climate change process, and lots of countries look at us and say, well, actually, talk is cheap, and actually massive gap between actually what people are doing in reality. But in the UK, we've got our carbon budgets that we have to meet sort of every 5 years, and we've got to show how we meet that progress. And I think it's in particular on areas like agriculture and on heat and buildings where the UK government has been shown by the Committee on Climate Change also that they haven't clearly set out how they're going to meet this next budget. It's got to be not just by 2050, we've got set targets where we're going to be come, I think it's 2030 and then 2035. The target we've set ourselves is we've got to reduce carbon dioxide emissions on 2021 levels by 40% by 2030.
Is it not true, and I'm sure I've read this very recently, that our performance on carbon reduction is actually better than virtually, I think, every other European country bar Sweden?
This is the government stats this is carbon emissions on our land base. What the Committee on Climate Change says, and what that doesn't consider, is the fact that we essentially stopped manufacturing large amounts of things. If you actually count the consumption emissions, if you buy a dishwasher or a washing machine made in China, we're not counting the carbon emissions from that or indeed that car or whatever. We're not counting, we're using large amounts of things that have created carbon, and we're not counting them.
But we are still global leaders. What I've been trying to say in the leadership debate is don't throw away the progress we've made, because everyone looks to the UK as an international leader on climate change and what we achieved at COP26 with the Glasgow Climate Declaration. People like China and India will say, well, if the UK can't keep its commitments, why should we do it? So that's been my rationale for saying, yeah, we're not perfect, but we're doing far better than everyone else, I think, in leading on this agenda.
We've made the commitments, but if we don't deliver on them, then the rest of the world's going to say, well, we're not even going to try. We have to deliver on the things we promised.
But I think it's right also that while the UK is falling down in certain areas, is to celebrate that we have come a long way. We have reduced our emissions by 47% and doubled the economy at the same time. And I've always said to people, this isn't a hair shirt thing we're doing, because otherwise we lose the narrative. People say, well, what's in it for me? We need to show people that this is going to regenerate economies, particularly in the Red Wall, in the north, in the northeast. And actually, this is a huge benefit to society. We're recreating and transforming our economy. But let's not sort of be down on our chips and say, oh, actually, we're never doing enough, because I don't think we'll win the argument that way.
I love that phrase, down on our chips. I've never heard that one before. Did you just invent that, or is that a real phrase?
I don't know. I think I was going to say something a bit rude at beginning with P on our chips, but I thought I'd try and moderate it.
Well done. We'll come to another question in a moment. It's 8:46.
LBC. Nick Ferrari at breakfast.
Call the Cabinet here exclusively on LBC. Secretary of State for International Trade, Anne-Marie Trevelyan. Penny Borden is effectively on Anne-Marie's team, but doesn't get your support. Why?
We all do our jobs in different ways, understandably. Perhaps now it's clear Penny has, for the last few months, spent some of her time focused on preparing her leadership campaign.
The big dog's only been gone a couple of weeks, so she's been spending all this time preparing her campaign, hasn't she?
So there have been a number of times when she hasn't been available, which would have been useful, and other ministers have picked up the pieces, yes.
Nick Ferrari at breakfast. Breakfast. Back tomorrow morning from 7. Listen on your radio and on Global Player, LBC. Cross Question with Iain Dale on LBC.
It's 8:50 on LBC. Giles Kenningham, Chris Skidmore, Natalie Bennett and Nick Thomas-Symonds are with me answering your questions. 0345 6060 973. A text from Sophie in York who says petrol prices have dropped from a record high, but the winter is still going to be really tough for me and my kids. I want my bills to be cheaper as well now. When do you think the cost of living crisis will ease? Nick?
Well, I wish it were the case that I could give a positive answer to this as it ending soon, but I'm afraid it doesn't look like that. And having listened carefully to what the Conservative leadership candidates have said, and one of them is going to be the Prime Minister in September, I really do fear that the situation is going to become worse. We're talking about hundreds of billions of pounds in uncosted tax pledges from most of the candidates. I haven't seen...
You're exaggerating there, aren't you? Because, I mean, nobody has promised hundreds of billions of pounds. You're counting them up all together, but only one of them gets elected.
Yeah, no, I accept that, but if you add up what's been said in the debate, that is the case. But you're quite right, Ian, that only one of them gets elected. But it is completely unfunded, and this comes in a sense of unreality about this Conservative leadership debate and the focus we need on economic growth. I mean, it does seem, by the way, that there is the criticism of the last 12 years we've been making about sluggish economic growth is shared by people in this leadership contest. But I'm afraid to say they are hardly going to be the people that are going to bring about change after the 12 years that we've had. We need a change of government to do that.
But it's not just on British government policy, is it? This is an international thing. This is affecting countries all over the world. It's not just a British phenomenon, which inflation in the 1970s and 80s, in a sense, was much easier to bring down because the Bank of England and the government could do things that really would affect things very quickly. But now, that with globalisation and things happening all over the world that that affect this country, it's much more difficult for our government to do anything.
Well, we can have a debate about whether the rise in the price of oil overnight in 1973 was more difficult to deal with in the 1970s and the situation we have now. But I think what we could agree upon is that the UK government, whichever it is, has substantial economic levers that it can use to actually ease the cost of living crisis. And that's not what we've seen from this government. In fact, what we're seeing at the moment, actually, are weeks and weeks of an interminable leadership contest when people actually need help now.
Chris?
So, unfortunately, I would agree with Nick in that, we are facing this longer-term issue of cost of living, which, as you've said, Iain, is driven by global forces. The war, as long as the war in Ukraine continues, and as long as China has quite a tight COVID policy, which is seeing sort of repeated lockdowns and then a disruption in the supply of manufactured goods, I can't see this ending anytime soon. And with inflation at 10%, that's the highest, I think, in my lifetime. There's nothing to celebrate.
I wish I could say the same thing.
I think, and this is where Rishi Sunak has said inflation is his number one issue to deal with because it's eroding everything.
So who's been Chancellor for the last 3 years?
Well, he's been Chancellor having to deal with the pandemic, and actually what he did over furlough, we didn't know what was going to happen, and he kept everyone in their jobs, and at the time he had record levels of...
Apart from 3 million.
Well, apart from 3 million self-employed people who, at the time, he had to take a distinction, and those are tough choices you've got to take when you're in government. And it's easy for Nick to say in opposition, we'll do X, Y, Z, if you're living in a fancy land, if you basically realise that you've got to be able to say, this is what I can do and this is what I can't do. But he did manage to stave off a huge unemployment crisis that could have happened as a result of the pandemic. And the consequence, we're living in a situation where you can't offer tax cuts. You can't offer people necessarily what they want in a cost of living crisis because we're still dealing with the legacy of the pandemic. So this is a dilemma, but only responsible politicians are going to be able to solve it. You can't promise people yes.
But give credit as well to the trade union movement about furlough. It was the trade union movement and Francis O'Grady and the TUC who went in and pressed Rishi Sunak about that.
He was the one who did it. You can't say, he didn't do nothing. Then when he does something, give the credit to somebody else. That isn't how it works.
I'm just saying that you should give credit to the trade union movement on that. But also, secondly, 15 tax rises. This is not a Chancellor who really understands the cost of living.
How are you going to pay for the NHS? How are you going to pay for all the disruption with schools? I mean, you're meant to be the Labour Party that's pro-public services, and it seems like roles have been reversed.
Giles Kenningham.
As you said, Iain, there are global forces at work, but I think it does highlight the need for us that we need to rethink what our energy strategy is. We need to be less dependent on Eastern Europe. We need to have things like, more nuclear in this country. And actually, on net zero, yes, everyone should still be committed to it, but do we need to rethink the timetable now? And does that apply to other policies, given what's going on? Because I think it is going to get worse before it's going to get better.
Natalie Bennett, I don't have necessarily the most brilliant memory, but I don't remember in the late 1970s, early 80s, people constantly coming on the radio and television and saying, I demand that the government takes action now to combat inflation. It's eroding my savings, it's making my life more difficult. We're a very different country 30 years on, and people expect different things of their government. And particularly when the government proved in COVID that it can act very dramatically and very, very quickly. But do you think people's expectations are sometimes overhyped?
Well, I think where we are now is explicitly the result of government action, or rather government inaction. Nick was referring to the trade unions. We have the strongest anti-trade union restrictive trade union law in Europe. The unions are relatively weak. If we had stronger unions, we'd have more wage share. I think this is bad news for Sophie. There's a real problem of diagnosis here. The cost of living crisis is not some new thing that started with Russia's invasion of Ukraine. This is a long-term trend whereby workers have got less and less share of the economy, the wage share. Profits, dividends have been taken out, and it's governments that have allowed companies to act like that. There was an excellent piece from Professor Maria Mazzucato in the Times talking about how companies' profit share just keeps going up and up, and a large amount of the inflation problem is people profiteering, companies, big multinational companies profiteering, while their workers slave away on a minimum wage, not even a real living wage, struggling to survive. And that's the result of government decisions that have privileged the well-being of multinational companies and rich individuals over ordinary society, have failed to keep the living wage at the national wage at a living wage.
Right, let's have a quick final question. I'm not sure it is a quick one, but it needs to be because we're nearing the end of the programme, from Chris in Croydon. Hello, Chris.
Oh, good evening, Iain. Good evening, panel. Yes, my question is this. Can a Green Party with no population policy be taken seriously?
I think that's aimed at you, Natalie.
I think it is, and I would point out that the ecological footprint of human beings is a product of the number of humans and the way they consume, the amount of stuff they consume. What we need to do is bring one planet living, everyone living within the physical limits of this one fragile planet. And I'd also point out that actually what's happening is globally and indeed in the UK now is at birth rates of about 1.56 children per woman, which is well below replacement levels. Around the world, China, India, all of the birth rates are falling off a cliff. But the issue is that we can deal with today is our consumption levels.
So your contention would be that there's no need for a policy on population restriction.
I have a policy on women's rights to control their own body, access to abortion, contraception, access to education. All of those things are reasons for human rights reason to have those policies. They have an impact on population, but I'm concerned about everyone being able to choose genuinely the number of children they have.
Anyone want to come in on this?
I think we've got a real issue in terms of vacancies and actually having a population that's able to fill the skills gaps in this country. The big problem over the longer term, if you have demographic decline, who's going to pay for the pensions? It breaks the social contract, I think, that exists amongst generations, because simply we're not going to be able to maintain our economy. And the whole point about net zero is that it allows for growth. And I think you can go green and still have economic growth and even better growth as a result.
We can come back and do that one again another time, because you can't have infinite growth on a finite planet.
Well, you're going to have the Chinese policy of capping the number of people?
No, I was talking about consumption. I said that's what I'm concerned about, and everyone having the right to choose the number of children they want to have, genuinely.
Well, good luck in trying to restrict people's ability to consume things.
Well, what we want to do is 4-day working week as standard with no loss of pay. You might have less stuff in your life and you have more time, more life.
I want Christmas every day. That doesn't mean I'm going to get it.
Well, if you have a universal basic income, you can sit round, Ian, and decide to write
universal
poetry.
Basic income, a 4-day working week, any other massively costly things you'd like to introduce?
Well, talking about savings, a 10-to-1 ratio, the top paid person in an organisation not paid more than 10 times the lowest paid person.
Okay. Well, as you say, those are things we could spend the next hour talking about. Karen in Hampshire texts to say, it's got so hot that even Ian has turned up to work in shorts. How are you keeping cool in this hideous heat? And just to prove, I'm not sure the camera can get that. You don't want to see my shorts, do you? Oh, Emily Thornberry's looking at me through the glass, covering her eyes. I don't know what she saw. Chris Skidmore, how are you coping with the heat?
Not too well. I've got 3 young children, 7 and under, who probably won't sleep too well tonight. But we live in one of those brick boxes that Natalie talked about, and we've got to be able to sort of try to look at adapting in the longer term, because it's not just the environment outside; it's also where we're spending our nights at the moment, and really uncomfortable. A night ahead, no doubt. And
so everyone imagines Tory MPs live in massive mansions.
No, I think sort of when it comes to your normal Tory MP like me, we do our share of the childcare. I'm not like Jacob Rees-Mogg. I have changed quite a few nappies. My 3rd has just finished, which meant this is the first time since August 2014 I've not changed a nappy, so it's a reason to celebrate.
A hero. Natalie?
Well, I'm lucky enough to, when I'm in London, to stay in a friend's place which was built in the 1930s, which is really quite cool. It was about the last time we were building really good quality housing.
Giles?
Fine, but the public transport system's driving me mad. It took me an hour and a half to get into work. Normally a 20-minute journey, having to tell everyone to work from home tomorrow. So, yeah, not impressed.
Well, I made the mistake of driving in today, thinking the trains might not be running very well. And I got to the junction of the A21 and the M25, and it was at a standstill. So I phoned our travel reporter, Jay Louise Knight, saying, what should I do? And she said, get off and go round the other way around the M25 and come through Croydon. And I got here with 30 minutes to spare. So I won't be doing that tomorrow, I have to say. Nick?
Well, I'm benefiting from being an early riser, Ian, because I came up from South Wales this morning I think I caught the train just after 6:30, which wasn't particularly busy, and the temperature was still cool enough to make travelling not a bad experience.
Marvellous. Well, thank you all very much indeed. Giles Kenningham, Chris Skidmore, Natalie Bennett and Nick Thomas-Symonds. Cross-question again tomorrow. In a moment, we're going to return to the Tory leadership election. Emily Thornberry will be joining me in the studio to give you her views, and we'll get yours as well. Do any of the candidates, after you've seen them in 2 TV debates, you've seen all of the different policies that they've announced or maybe not announced over the weekend, do any of them inspire you? Or how damaging do you think that debate last night was for the Conservatives, because they're not going to have any more, well, certainly not until they've reduced the field to 2. 0345 6060 973. We'll also be talking to Katie Perrier, former Director of Communications under Theresa May. It's 2 minutes past 9.
On your radio, on Global Player, and
Play LBC.
leading Britain's conversation. This is LBC.
From Global's newsroom, Rishi Sunak remains the front-runner after the third round in the Tory leadership contest. The former Chancellor got 115 votes from Conservative MPs. Penny Mordaunt is still in second place with 82, an MP backing Liz Truss, who increased her support